Monnier was a beautiful 25-year-old from a very wealthy, prominent family in Paris who desperately wanted to find a husband and move out of her mother's home and start her own life. The man she would fall in love with was not a young, rich aristocrat like her family was hoping, but instead was an older, poor lawyer. Her mother told her that she needed to break off this relationship and find a more suitable suitor. But Blanche refused and said she was in love with this man. When her mother outright forbid her from seeing this man ever again, she refused and began sneaking out at night to spend time with this guy and was away from the home quite a bit, just kind of escaping her mom. But during this tumultuous time where Blanche is very much at odds with her mother, Blanche would unexpectedly die. And since this is the late 1800s, people did that at a young age. They just unexpectedly died. And so her lover and her family and society mourned her loss, but ultimately time went on and people moved on. 25 years later, in 1901, French police received this strange handwritten letter that just basically states that the Monnier family has a very dirty secret and you should go check their estate out. Now, the Monnier family was in excellent standing in Paris. I mean, they were one of the more prominent families. The mother, she was known for her charitable works. They were just one of those families that everybody knew, including certainly the French police. And so when they got this letter, they weren't actually that concerned that there was any truth to this letter, but they felt like it was their duty to at least go knock on the Monnier family's door, show them the letter, and then just take a look around. And so they did that. They showed up. They showed the Monnier family, including her mother who was at the door, hey, we have this letter. Would you mind if we looked around? The Monnier family was very cooperative. They let them walk around their whole big estate, and the police didn't find anything. As they're chatting in the doorway, getting ready to leave, because this is all just a big misunderstanding, one of the officers turns and looks up a little flight of stairs that they hadn't gone up and notices a small door that's been padlocked shut, and it's the only door at the end of this one stairwell. And he says off the cuff to the family, well, what's in that door up there? And Blanche's mother says, oh, that's a supply closet. You know, our assistants come in and they'll go in there and use that. And the French police officers say, well, would you mind if we just poked our heads in? It's the only space we haven't checked. And since we're already here, we'll just check that box. We'll go in there and poke our heads in. At this point, the Monnier family says, no, we're not going to let you go in there because you don't need to. It's just a supply closet. Now the police say, you're going to go ahead and open up that door. At which point the family says, no, we're not. So one of the officers tells the family to stay right here, while the other officer goes up the stairs to try to break open this lock and see what's in there. As soon as he's right outside the door, he's hit with this overwhelmingly disgusting smell. It smells like rotting flesh. It smells like death. He covers his mouth and he breaks open the lock and he opens the door, and there in the middle of this dark, disgusting smelling room on a rotting straw mattress is none other than Blanche Monnier. 25 years later, she is alive. She barely weighs 55 pounds and she's chained to a bed. She has not come out of those chains or moved off of that bed in 25 years. The smell was so bad that could barely be in there for longer than a few minutes at a time, but one of the officers immediately goes over and knocks down some of the wood that was blocking up the windows, and sunlight pours into the room, and it's the first time Blanche Monnier is seeing sunlight in 25 years. The reason she had been imprisoned in this room is because 25 years earlier, when she was fighting with her mother about not seeing this poor commoner, and she wasn't willing to break off the relationship with him, her mother told her to go in this room and said, you can't come out until you tell me you're going to break it off with this guy. She was so in love with him that she said no, and her mother wouldn't let her leave. And then days turned into months, turned into years, turned into decades, and here we are 25 years later, and she had never left that room. The mother and the brother of Blanche Monnier were arrested, and the public found out about this, and it incited a huge mob that went to their house. And it actually caused Blanche Monnier's mother to have a heart attack, and she would end up dying only a couple of days later. And so she never had to serve any jail time or really answer to any of her crimes. And the brother was complicit in what was happening to Blanche Monnier, but he kind of weaseled his way out of it. As for Blanche Monnier, she was remarkably lucid when she came out of that room, and she commented on how lovely it was to breathe fresh air and to be in sunlight. She was brought to a hospital where she did make a recovery, but she was so screwed up from being being in that room that she didn't really know how to function in society anymore. And so she was moved to a mental institution, and unfortunately she died about 10 years. A woman living in Chicago, Illinois named Jordan Baranskis opened her eyes and realized she had fallen asleep on the couch the night before. She looked up and the TV was still on, and then she looked down at the other section of the couch and her boyfriend Matt was also asleep on the couch. As much as she wanted to keep sleeping alongside her boyfriend, she had work that day, so she stood up, turned the TV off, and made her way upstairs to get ready. As soon as she got upstairs, the first thing she did is go into her bedroom and get her purse that she left on the foot of her bed. But when she got in the room, her purse wasn't there. So she leaves her bedroom and she starts searching all the rooms upstairs and she can't find her purse. And she's thinking to herself, I'm certain I had it the night before. I remember rifling through my purse before going downstairs and starting to fold laundry before ultimately falling asleep on the couch. So after spending about 15 minutes looking for the purse unsuccessfully, and now she's starting to stress because she's going to be late for work because she can't find her purse, she goes downstairs and she wakes Matt up and says, hey, I gotta find my purse. I thought I left it upstairs. Apparently I didn't. Can you help me look for it? Matt rolls over. He doesn't really want to get up because he's pretty tired and he doesn't have work, so he doesn't want to wake up right now. And he says, well, are you sure you didn't leave it at the restaurant last night? I mean, if you already looked, it's probably not here. You want to just give him a call and see if you left it there? Jordan was immediately really annoyed by his reaction because she just wanted him to stand up and help her look for the purse because she had work and he could just go back to sleep. And so it started this argument between the two of them where Matt just wanted her to call the restaurant because he was convinced she had it there. And Jordan was like, no, I know I had my purse. I'm positive I had it last night before I fell asleep on the couch with you. So their argument begins to escalate a little bit, and that's when Jordan remembers that they had recently installed a Nest camera downstairs to monitor their dogs whenever they were gone. And she thought, we can just look at the footage on the Nest camera, we can see me walking into the apartment, and I will either have or not have my purse in my hand. And so Jordan opens up her app and she calls Matt over and they go back to the night before, right before they left for the restaurant. She's got her purse in hand. They leave the front door and then several hours go by and they come back in and very clearly Jordan has her purse in her hand. And Jordan turns to Matt and says, told you so. And Matt's like, okay, fine, let me help you look. And as they're about to put the app down, she realizes on the Nest camera timeline that motion was detected at 3:30 in the morning when they were both clearly asleep on the couch. And so she calls Matt back over and says, here, look, there's motion detected at 3:30 in the morning, and they hit play. After the couple had fallen asleep on the couch with the TV on, a hooded figure emerges from their upstairs hallway and stands at the top of the stairs and just watches the two of them sleep. Before he left, he stole her purse along with a couple of other things from their apartment. And somehow this guy has never been caught and he's been given the nickname Creeper Ghost. Student Lauren Giddings was only one test away from completing her dream and becoming a public defender. Even though she had a ton of studying still to do, she had taken off the first week in June to go to her sister's wedding where she was the maid of honor. Right before she left the wedding to go back to school, she joked with her family that she was going to be locking herself in the library and just studying 24/7 and that nobody should get in touch with her. But when she got back to campus, none of her classmates that she studied with saw her at the library. And in fact, when they didn't see her for a couple of days, they started reaching out to her and texting her and calling her to see if she was okay. But she never picked up, she never wrote back, and so no one knew what was going on with her. One of Lauren's classmates would reach out to Lauren's sister and would ask her, hey, have you talked to your sister at all? Because we haven't seen her. And Lauren's sister would write back and say, oh no, everything is just fine. Lauren told us before she left the wedding that she was going to be locking herself away and just studying 24/7, so I'm sure everything is just fine. But this classmate wasn't convinced because this felt very uncharacteristic of Lauren to not study at the library and then not to pick up any phone calls or text messages. So she would call the police and say, hey, can you please go check on Lauren's apartment because I think something's wrong. So a police officer goes over to Lauren's apartment and knocks on the door. Lauren doesn't answer. They try the door, it's locked. The officer goes outside and looks around the outside of her apartment. There's no broken windows. There's no obvious signs of a break-in. And so the officer leaves and says, I can't do anything else unless you guys file a missing person report. So a couple of days go by and there's still no word from Lauren. And at this point, Lauren's family is now concerned and they do file a missing persons report. So the police go back to Lauren's apartment. They try knocking. She doesn't come to the door. The door is still locked. So they get the owner of the apartment building to open up her door. And when they go inside, Lauren's not in there, and at first, it doesn't seem like anything is wrong until they notice her cell phone, her keys, her purse, and her laptop are all still in there. This made the police think there could be something sinister happening here, and so they went to Lauren's friends and family and they asked, does she have any enemies? Does she have any reason to be fearful for her life? Initially, they said no one would want to harm Lauren. Everybody loves Lauren. But Lauren's sister would say to the police that there was actually one comment Lauren made a year ago that now seemed a little bit more relevant. Lauren had just got back from a vacation and she noticed there were things in her apartment that seemed like they had been moved, like someone else had been here, but no one was supposed to be in her apartment. And so she told her sister, and the two of them talked about it a little bit, but it was quickly forgotten about because there wasn't a reasonable explanation, and Lauren was so busy with school, she didn't pursue it. After police have done a thorough investigation of the inside of Lauren's apartment, they move outside of her apartment and begin scanning the exterior of the building, and they make a huge discovery. An officer who was looking in the dumpster noticed this big black trash bag that looked out of place, and when he tried to move it, it was very heavy, and when they opened it, they found a human torso, and it was Lauren's. Right before this discovery was made, a news crew had shown up outside the apartment building and was trying to interview people that lived in the apartment complex because they had been tipped off that somebody who was living here had been missing for over a week, and now police were getting involved. They saw what looked like a resident of the building looking visibly shaken up, watching the police doing their investigation, and they went over to interview him. It would turn out his name was Stephen McDaniel, and he was Lauren's neighbor, and he was a classmate of hers in law school. The interviewer asked Stephen, what was your last interaction with Lauren? And Stephen became really focused on how he had not seen her in the last week. And in fact, speaking on behalf of my other classmates, no one's seen her. She must have just vanished. As they're doing this interview, right on the other side of a bush, this police officer discovers Lauren's torso, and the news kind of gets out to the interviewer, they've found a body. And the interviewer says out loud to Stephen, it looks like they found a body. And Stephen just completely changes and he goes, a body? And then he goes completely silent to the point where the interviewer says, are you okay? And he just stands there looking completely distant before walking away from the interviewer, sitting down with his back turned and hyperventilates before the interview ends. Once this case went from missing person to homicide, the police started searching all the rooms on Lauren's floor. And Stephen's room is right next to Lauren's, so he was the first room they searched. Apparently, as they began searching his room, he was standing just outside the door and sweating profusely and drank over 10 bottles of water. In his apartment, they found a key to Lauren's apartment. And what he would do is whenever she was gone, he would sneak into her room and download her hard drive, as well as steal little souvenirs like small articles of clothing and other things that he would hoard in his apartment. When they went on Stephen's computer and checked his browser history, basically the only things he did on the internet were look at Lauren's Facebook and LinkedIn profiles. But the creepiest thing they found was this camera that was literally duct taped to this long pole. And on the camera were all these surveillance videos of Lauren, because what he would do is he would go outside and he would hoist up this camera and he would film her through her windows in the middle of the night. Stephen was quickly charged with Lauren's murder, to which he pled guilty, and he would openly confess to the details of how she died in court. Most times, he used this surveillance footage to confirm she was not in her apartment so he could sneak in and steal from her. But on the day she was murdered, he would use that camera technique to confirm she was home. And shortly after confirming she was in fact home and asleep, he put on a mask and used his key to get into her apartment and walked right into her room, which woke her up. According to Stephen, she apparently sat up and said, "You need to leave." At this point, he jumps on the bed, and in their struggle, his mask would come off, and Lauren would recognize it's clearly Stephen, and she would plead with him by name to stop. But he didn't stop, and he would strangle her to death. Afterwards, he dragged her into the bathroom and began cutting her up into fairly small pieces. Some of those pieces got flushed down the toilet. The others were put in bags, and only one of those bags was ever discovered, and that was the one of her torso. Stephen was ultimately given a life sentence. Here is a highlight of Stephen's interview when it's revealed that they've discovered Lauren's body.
I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I haven't seen anything. I mean, I've always heard noise outside, but it's just people walking by pretty much. I mean, we just don't know where she is.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's why we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
Fitness instructor. She lived in Midlothian, Texas, and she taught a fitness boot camp out of a local church at least one day a week, every week. Missy was extremely bubbly and outgoing, and everybody seemed to really like her, and her personality really shined on social media, where she was an avid Facebook user, often posting multiple times a day, every day of the week. Missy would post information about upcoming fitness classes, either that she was teaching or that she was simply participating in. She would also post her own fitness regimen and her diet. She was just very focused on health. She also shared fairly personal things, like pictures of her family and where they were going and what they were up to. And she left her personal cell phone right on her Facebook page. So clearly, Missy was fine with kind of being out there. On April 17th, 2016, there was a weather report that came in that the next day there was going to be really, really heavy rain, in particular in the morning. And Missy's class was scheduled for the next morning at 5 a.m. and she started getting calls and text messages from the people who were going to that class asking, is this class still going to happen? By 7:55 p.m. that night, so many people had asked about it that she decided to just put a public post on her Facebook page addressing the weather. And it just said, if it's raining, we're still training, no excuses, you are gladiators. On the post, she included directions of how to get to the church, where this class was going to be in the church, what time they were starting, and what they could expect. Later that night at 9:23 p.m., she did another Facebook post that said, going to bed, I have to get up tomorrow at 3:30. The next day at 4:16 in the morning, a street security camera picked up Missy pulling into the church's parking lot. Even though her class didn't start until 5 a.m., she liked to get there early to make sure the classroom was set up and to warm up a little bit and make sure she was super motivated and cheerful as soon as they walked in. The security cameras inside the church capture Missy walking in through the front doors at 4:20 in the morning. Then, just before 5 a.m., the first couple of students arrived at the classroom and they walk in to find Missy laying on the ground, bleeding from her head, totally unresponsive. They call 911, police and paramedics show up, and as soon as they get there, they pronounce Missy dead. Initially, there was some speculation that she might have fallen and hit her head, but they noticed all these puncture marks in her head that looked intentionally inflicted, like someone had struck her. And later, when they reviewed the security footage from inside the church, it was confirmed that she definitely was murdered. Earlier that morning at 3:50 a.m., so 26 minutes before Missy arrives in the church parking lot, an unknown figure wearing police tactical gear from head to toe breaks into the church. From 3:50 in the morning when they first get inside the church to 4:20 in the morning when Missy walks through the front doors, this unknown figure just kind of strolls casually up and down the halls of this church. It looked like they were carrying a hammer or perhaps a crowbar, and periodically as they're kind of casually walking down the hall, they would turn to a window of a door and they would break it with whatever they're holding in their hand, and then they would just keep walking on. Like there was no reason for them to break the window, they're just bored. And this was actually an important point that police would make about this footage. This person walking around does not appear to want to vandalize the church. I mean, they're breaking a couple windows, but they could have done a lot more damage to the building, and they didn't. They don't appear to be looking to steal anything, and in fact, later, police would confirm that nothing was stolen. What it looks like they're doing is just kind of wasting time, like they have some clear objective for being here, but they can't do it quite yet. They're waiting for a trigger of some kind, and it would turn out that that trigger was Missy walking through those doors at 4:20 in the morning. As soon as Missy made her way into the classroom, the assailant followed her and proceeded to beat her to death with whatever they were holding in their hand. By the time police arrived a little after 5 a.m., the suspect was long gone. Initially, police believed it was going to be fairly easy to identify who killed Missy. The person on camera wearing the tactical gear had a very distinctive gait with their feet turned out, and they walked with a bit of a limp, and they had very slouched posture. And the police figured as soon as we put this surveillance footage out in the public domain, someone's going to come forward and say they recognize this person. But despite the hundreds of leads that poured in from people after watching this video saying, oh yeah, I know this person, Well, the police checked into all of them and they all checked out. Everybody had an alibi. And so years later, the police are still not able to identify who killed Missy or why, and so her case remains unsolved. Here is the security footage of Missy's killer casually walking around the halls, aimlessly smashing windows and opening doors, just waiting for Missy to show up. Mother of two, Lisa Mackenzie, lived in what she called a safe neighborhood in Bridgend, Wales. One day when she was cleaning up her kids' toys in her backyard, she noticed something strange about her back door. She thought maybe one of her kids had taken paint and slapped it across the back door, or perhaps it was even mud. But then when she walked up to the door itself, she could tell that there were two very deep gouges in the door right next to the locking mechanism. Also, the key portion of the lock had loads of scratches all over it. Initially, she thought maybe these have been here the whole time and I just haven't noticed them until right now. But when she looked at the two gouge marks in the door, they looked fresh. Since she did not own a dog and didn't know of any other dogs in the area that might come into her property that could have scratched up the door, she figures, okay, it's gotta be my kids. So she calls her kids outside and she points at the marks on the door, and the kids swear they didn't do it, and they say, I don't remember ever seeing that. That's new. At this point, Lisa has this sinking feeling that someone must have tried to break into our house, but she doesn't want to scare her kids, so she tells them to go back in the house. They go inside and she's standing in front of the door and she's just looking at the marks thinking like, what do I do? And she notices in the bushes right next to the door, there's something silver sitting in the bush. She bent down and picked up a wire that she immediately recognized as a windshield wiper insert because she had recently had to replace her windshield wipers because one of the inserts was missing. She also noticed this wire that was very rigid had been bent up at the end like a hook. And it was at this point that Lisa went from maybe someone's trying to break in to definitely someone just tried to break in. They're using the wire from my windshield to try to defeat the lock. Lisa didn't make much money, but with the money she did have, she went out and got the most expensive, sophisticated surveillance camera that she could put on the back of her house to monitor that back door. And in addition to the camera, starting that night, Lisa began compulsively checking every door, every lock, every window, everything that could secure the house. She would check 3, 4, 5 times before going to bed every single night. And then the next morning, she would get up and she would review the footage from the night before. And for the next several weeks, no one tried to break into her house. There was no suspicious activity recorded on the camera. Everything was normal. Until Monday, July 13th, when she woke up and noticed her back gate, not her door, but the gate leading into her yard was slightly open. Now, because she was obsessively checking every door, every window, every lock, that included that gate, meaning the night before, she had triple checked that that gate was shut and locked. So for it to be open right now meant something had happened the night before. And so without even going outside, she goes right to her security camera footage, and she would say that what she saw made her physically ill. Earlier that morning at 1:15 a.m., an unknown man wearing a rain jacket and gloves walks up to the back of their house and puts his hands and his face right up against the window and starts looking in the window. And then he steps back, pulls a flashlight out, and starts looking in the kitchen with his flashlight, just brazenly looking in the house. And at some point, he puts the flashlight down and looks up and clearly notices the camera that she has installed. He looks at it for a minute and then just kind of shrugs and goes right back to shining his light into the kitchen before going around to the door itself and trying the door and fidgeting with the door to open it. It was locked. He goes to the window, he tries to open the window, it's locked, and he would make his way down the side of the house trying to open all of the windows until walking around to the back side of the house where there wasn't a camera. And then when he couldn't open any of the windows or doors because Lisa was diligent about locking everything, he must have just given up and left. Lisa's horrified. She gets in touch with police. She shows them the footage, but unfortunately, his face was kind of obscured in the video, and so they were never able to identify him. Here are the highlights from Lisa's security footage. There is already tons of shocking content on the internet, there is still something truly insane about Wu Yongning's videos. In 2017, Wu was a 26-year-old climbing enthusiast who was dubbed China's first rooftopper. A rooftopper is someone who, usually illegally, climbs onto rooftops, cranes, smokestacks, big antennas, skyscrapers, or any other really high, dangerous location. Almost always, these daredevils are going to these incredibly dangerous locations in order to capture footage of themselves so they can post it to the internet in hopes that it goes viral and they become famous and make a bunch of money. But because there are so many people competing for the internet's attention, rooftoppers really need to push the envelope if they want to stand out and make it big. And Wu Yongning did just that, and the internet rewarded him with millions of followers and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Most rooftoppers would go to the tops of these incredible locations and then take selfies of themselves standing there posing at the top. Wu would do that, but he also did a couple other things that nobody else was doing that kind of became his trademarks. The first one was he would dangle over the edge of the building or the crane or the antenna that he was holding onto, and he would do pull-ups, but he would keep doing them until he reached muscle failure and then would barely be able to pull himself back up to safety. Another trademark move is he would go to the top of these huge buildings and he would get right on the edge and he would do a handstand and then he would pull one arm back. So he's doing a one-armed handstand and then he would tilt his body as far as he could over the edge until he couldn't do it any farther and he let himself come back over to safety. And then perhaps the most difficult to watch trademark was when Wu would basically run up to the edge of buildings and stop just short. And he wouldn't just run to the edge, he would use a self-balancing scooter and go as fast as he could right to the edge of the building and stop just short. And over again, he'd go right to the edge and stop, where he's literally an inch away from tumbling off the edge. Or he'd line himself up where he knew exactly how far he was from the edge, and he would do these really aggressive somersaults forward, and he would stop with his legs dangling off the edge of the building. And of course, all of these trademark moves were done without any safety equipment, and most times Wu did these stunts without anybody there to potentially pull him back up if he gets stuck. About 3/4 of the way through 2017, Wu had posted over 500 videos and live streaming clips to various social media sites, and he was starting to make some real money off of it. On one video sharing site alone, he had made over $80,000 just from donations that had come in. And so it was clear this was becoming a career. But as the money and the fame were coming into Wu, he started to realize that in order for him to stay on top and keep earning at this level, he would need to continuously outperform his last big stunt. And already he was brushing up against death on virtually every video he took. In early November of that year, Wu heard about a competition that was offering $15,000 to its winner. The details of this competition are hazy at best, but from the sounds of it, it was a viral video competition. Make the most viral video and you win the prize. This competition served as motivation for Wu to finally attempt his craziest stunt yet. He figured if he had the footage of this particular stunt, he was sure to win this competition, and with the prize money, he could pay for his wedding and cover his mother's medical expenses. And so on November 8th, Wu traveled to the Huaiyan International Center in central China. This massive 62-story skyscraper would be the tallest building Wu had ever performed a stunt on. The public was only able to get up to the 44th floor, and so Wu had to take the elevator up to somewhere between the 40th and 44th floor, at which point he climbed out of a window and free climbed his way all the way up to the top, so 20 additional floors just climbing the side of a skyscraper. Once he got to the rooftop, he set up his tripod and his camera and he turned on his live stream. And then he walked around and he began preparing himself for the stunt. Live stream viewers that tuned in would see Wu sitting on the edge of the skyscraper, and he's meticulously wiping down the edge of this building. It's the area he'll be grabbing onto to perform his stunt, which was going to be his trademark pull-ups. And so after several minutes of Wu cleaning this ledge, he begins to lower himself where his arms are still tucked up over the ledge. So he's not hanging, he's got his arms kind of anchored on the top. He's like testing the edge of this lip. And he kind of feels around and he can tell that it's not a good grip. It's not good enough for him to go down to a full extension. And so he pulls himself back up and he goes back to wiping down the edge. And from the looks of it, it seems like Wu is actually pretty nervous about this stunt. And normally when you watch Wu's videos, he doesn't seem nervous at all, even leading up to his stunt. But this one just seemed different. And so after again wiping down this ledge as much as he possibly could, He gets himself ready, lowers himself onto his arms, he lets his legs drop over the edge of the building, and then he goes to full extension. And from there, he does 2 complete pull-ups, and then after the second pull-up, he begins to try to pull himself back up to safety. But he's fatigued and he can't quite get himself up over the edge. He starts to use his feet to try to use the glass to push himself back up, but he can't get a grip. And for the next 15 seconds, Wu is desperately trying to get himself up and over this ledge. He's trying to muscle himself up, but it's obvious he's completely fatigued. I mean, he did free climb almost 20 stories to get up there, and so it makes sense his arms would be tired. But there's nobody up there to help pull him up. And so after a while, he goes back to full extension because he can't do anything, and he looks down as if he's sizing up if he can survive this fall, which he obviously can't. And then the camera picks up a sort of whimpering sound that appears to come from Wu, and then he loses his grip and he falls to his death. Here is a segment of his final video right before he fell. Police officer in Arizona was driving on the highway when he saw a tractor trailer that was pulled over on the side of the road with its hazards on. And so he pulls over, he gets out, walks out to the driver's side door, and he looks up at the driver and says, "Hey, do you need any help?" And the driver is still sitting in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel. He's barely acknowledging the police officer. And he kind of looks down and shrugs and just says, "No, I'm okay." The police officer doesn't know what it was, but there was something off about this guy. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but there was something off about him. He couldn't tell what it was. So he asked him again, "Are you sure that nothing is wrong?" And the driver, again, very sketchy, just says, "No, nothing's wrong." And so the police officer, acting on a gut instinct, says, "Hey, can you step out? Do you mind if I talk to you outside of your vehicle?" And so very reluctantly, the driver kind of slithers his way out of the vehicle, making sure that he doesn't fully open the door to kind of let the officer see what's going on inside his cab. He gets out and shuts the door, and the two start talking. Over the course of their conversation, where basically the officer is trying to figure out what you're doing here. Why are you parked on the side of the road with your hazards on? Why aren't you telling me what's going on? Why are you acting so strange? At some point, the officer just kind of had enough and he said, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to need to search your vehicle." He opens up the door and goes inside, and there's nothing out of the ordinary in the front 2 seats. But when he looks into the back section where there was a sleeping compartment, because this is a big 18-wheeler, and there's like a little area in the back of the cab where these guys doing these long drives can sleep. When he looks into that section, he sees there's this woman with her mouth gagged, handcuffed, huddling in the corner of this sleeping section, looking absolutely terrified. The officer immediately gets out and he grabs the guy and he puts him under arrest. As he's arresting him, the driver is saying, "No, she wants to be here. She chose to be here." But the officer didn't buy it and he said, "You're under arrest for kidnapping." The officer puts this guy in his cruiser and shuts the door, and then he calls for backup. When backup arrived, they were able to take the woman out. She was unhurt. She survived. But it would turn out that she was one of the very, very lucky few, because the driver was Robert Rhodes, aka the truck stop killer, who over the previous 20 years had killed over 50 women. He was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. But the crime that the truck stop killer was actually known for was not this kidnapping where this woman survived. It was the kidnapping and murder of a woman named Regina K. Walters. Regina was a young woman who came from a broken home, and at the age of 14, she ran away and began hitchhiking across Texas with her boyfriend. In February of 1990, Rhodes picked up Regina and her boyfriend, who were looking for a ride. Rhodes almost immediately kills Regina's boyfriend and takes Regina captive, and he keeps her chained up in his traveling torture chamber for several years before ultimately killing her as well. After Rhodes was finally arrested by this Arizona police officer on the side of the highway, the investigation searched Rhodes' house, and they found some pictures. This is a picture of Regina K. Walters in the abandoned barn where her body was ultimately found. Immediately after Rhodes took this picture, he ended Regina's Constantinescu was a 27-year-old woman living in the Romanian city of Timisoara. Loana was a devout practitioner of Zoroastrianism, which is one of the world's oldest organized religions that began in ancient Persia and is now practiced primarily in East Asia. In the city that Loana was living in, it was majority Christian, and they looked at Zoroastrians as witches. As such, Loana was persecuted and ostracized primarily by these two Christian ministers that spread a rumor that she was drinking the blood of local children and that she worshipped Satan. That rumor would spread and grow to the point where everybody knew Loana as like the singular witch of all the Zoroastrians in the city, and it ultimately incited this angry Christian mob to storm her house on October 21st, 1909, and rip her into the streets and savagely beat her to within an inch of her life. She would survive this lynching, and she would be taken to a hospital where she'd be treated for severe blunt force injuries and lacerations. But after 2 days of being in the hospital, when she had not made a full recovery at all, she checked herself out and headed home. The next day, Loana was found dead in her apartment, and her family and friends initially believed that she had died as a result of the injuries she had sustained from the angry mob, and that perhaps she had checked herself out of the hospital too soon, and untreated, that's why she must have passed away early. But when the authorities arrived at her house and began looking at the scene, it did not look like she had died as a result of those injuries. It looked more like some sort of ritual suicide. She was laying on this sofa with her arms over her chest. Next to the sofa was an altar that was adorned with strange occult symbols and ritual herbs and effigies, and on the altar was this goblet with deep, dark red stains on the inside. When they looked at Loana, even though she was fully dressed, underneath her sleeves were all these cuts on her arms, and there were cuts on her legs as well. After her autopsy, the medical examiner said she had died from a combination of blood loss and internal shock from ingesting massive quantities of blood that triggered cardiac arrest. Loana had been draining her own blood into the sacramental goblet, drinking it, and then doing it over and over again until she died. Locals believed that that was not just a ritual suicide, but rather she was placing a curse on her enemies. Almost immediately following her death, those two Christian ministers that had spread those rumors about her that led to the mob coming and attacking her, they both died of an extremely rare blood-borne illness. And then immediately following their demise, the two primary vigilantes that actually organized that mob that would attack Loana, they both died. One was hit by a falling tree and another died in a fire. And according to more recent accounts, Loana's curse didn't end with the death of her tormentors. There have been dozens of reports of people after seeing this image, which is of Loana after she was discovered by authorities in her home, that they will have bouts of extreme sleep paralysis. These are people that have never had sleep paralysis before, that this picture somehow induces sleep paralysis in them, like they're cursed by Loana. And so now that you've seen this image, you're cursed too. So 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddart was house sitting for her aunt and uncle. Cassie was very responsible, and so her aunt and uncle didn't just trust her to house sit, they also regularly asked her to babysit their son. During this particular house sitting weekend, Casey had invited her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, over to the residence to watch a movie with her. She had also invited two other friends named Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, who were classmates of her and Matt's. And so while the four teens are watching this movie, Brian and Tori kind of awkwardly stand up and announce to the other two that they don't want to watch a movie on the TV, they want to go watch a movie in the movie theater, and they promptly leave. Cassie and Matt thought it was a little bit odd that they would come over here specifically to watch a movie with them, only to say, we don't want to watch a movie with you guys, we want to watch it in the theater, but they didn't think much of it and they stayed to finish the movie. Unbeknownst to Cassie and Matt, when Brian and Tori left, they actually looped around to the back of the residence and unlocked the basement door so they could quietly re-enter later, because these boys had been planning to do something absolutely horrible to Cassie, and they planned on doing it that night. Brian and Tori idolized serial killers. When Brian and Tori happened to watch the movie Scream together, which is a popular horror movie where this masked villain sneaks into teenagers' homes and terrorizes them, they decided that that would be the way they gained infamy. They would reenact the murder scenes from the movie Scream, but in real life. Shortly after this revelation, they begin filming themselves as they come up with their big plan of how they're going to break into someone's home and what they're going to do to them. And at some point on camera, they would say that they've identified their first victim, and it's going to be Cassie Jo Stoddard. They just needed to wait for a time when she was going to be alone. And when they found out she was going to be house sitting over that weekend in September for her aunt and uncle, they put their plan into motion. But when they showed up and Matt Beckham was there, Cassie's boyfriend, it kind of screwed up their plan. And so that's why Brian and Tori had stood up and said they were going to go watch a movie at the movie theater, because what they really wanted to do was come back later when Matt wasn't there anymore so they could attack Cassie. So Brian and Tori leave, and they do go to the movie theater, and they do buy tickets because they figure this is a great opportunity to create a solid alibi for themselves. But they don't stick around for the movie. They get back in their car and they drive around and film themselves excitedly talking about how great it's going to be when Cassie's all alone and they can attack her. After a couple of hours of driving around, they can't wait any longer, and they figure that Matt must be gone by now. They park at the end of the street, they get out, they put on their masks and their gloves, and they sneak around to the side of the house where there was that open door that Brian had left. They open it up and then go inside of the residence where Cassie was, and they can hear upstairs that Matt is still there. Brian and Tori at this point felt so committed that they just said, you know what, we're gonna have to kill Matt too. So straight out of a horror movie, Brian and Tori hide in the basement wearing their mask and their gloves, they've got their knives, and they start making all this noise to try to get Cassie and Matt to come downstairs to see what's making all the sound. But it doesn't work. They don't come downstairs. So the next thing they do is they go to the circuit breakers and they cut the power to the house, hoping that Matt and Cassie will come downstairs to try to turn it back on. But again, Matt and Cassie stay upstairs. And so Brian and Tori turn the power back on and just continue to make sounds in the basement in hopes that Matt or Cassie, or hopefully both, would come downstairs so they could live out this fantasy. Meanwhile, upstairs, Matt and Cassie hadn't heard any of the sounds going on in the basement, but when the power went out, Cassie got really frightened and she asked Matt would he please stay with her overnight, and so Matt calls his mom and asks if that would be okay, and she says no, but you can invite Cassie over to our house and she can stay with us, and then tomorrow morning I'd be happy to drive her back to her aunt and uncle's house. But at the time the offer was made, the lights had come back on and Cassie had kind of calmed down and said, you know what, Matt, I'm actually just fine. I'm going to stay here. At approximately 10:30 p.m. that night, Brian and Tori could hear Matt's mom showing up, picking him up and taking him home. And they were fairly certain that Cassie was alone, but they were going to wait for a couple minutes to make sure she really was. As they were waiting, Matt actually called Tori and said, hey, I just left Cassie's house. Can I come meet up with you guys? And Matt would later tell police that he couldn't really understand what Tori was saying. It was like he was whispering. And so Matt assumed that he must still be in the movie theater watching the movie. And Matt kind of gave up on the idea of meeting up with them and ultimately just hung up. And so after Tori got off the phone with Matt, he turned to Brian and said, she's alone. Matt just said so. Brian and Tori turned the power off once again and then walked up the stairs and slammed a closet door in hopes that it would entice her to come into the basement. But it didn't work because Cassie was horrified. She heard the slamming door, the lights are out and she's all alone, and so she's huddled up on the couch, terrified. So Brian and Tori, frustrated they can't live out their fantasy exactly the way they wanted to by attacking her in the basement, so they go upstairs, walk into the living room where Cassie is huddled on the couch, fearing for her life, and they proceed to stab their friend to death. After the murder, Brian and Tori ran from the house, got in their car, and the first thing they did is they fired up their video camera and they filmed their excited reaction to ending Cassie's life. Brian and Tori believed they had a solid alibi because they had those movie tickets, but after Cassie's body was discovered just a couple of days later, the police immediately went to Matt Beckham, her boyfriend, and started questioning him, and he immediately said, well, Brian and Tori were the only other two people that were with us that night. The police go to Brian and Tori, and under intense questioning, Brian and Tori would confess to what they had done. They were convicted and given life sentences without the opportunity for parole. Here is some of the video footage that was found on their camera.
We found our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddard. She's going to be alone in a big, dark house out in the middle of nowhere. How perfect can you get? We know there's lots of doors. There's lots of places to hide. I locked the back doors. It's all locked. Now we just gotta wait. I just killed Cassie. We just left her house. I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie.